Hello, everybody. Professor Molnar here, back again, this time with Chapter 11 of the book and Project Control. We have been talking about control for weeks and weeks now. We just didn't call it that specifically. So this time, let's get into it specifically in The Theater of the Mind by Andy Molnar. So control is really about information that we collect about our systems, and we compare it to the desired or planned level. And we take action if there's a gap between that actual and desired performance. If they differ enough and we have to define that, we're going to take action. Now, note then that we'll have to report this performance, and that ties back to the communication lesson. And we're going to compare the differences prior to that. And we're going to want to understand why the differences exist. So there was a slide that we talked about some time ago about collecting work performance data. That's raw data, raw information. Then we have to turn that into work performance information, which is that data analyzed. And from that, we can summarize in some sort of executive report called a work performance report. It's just a compilation it's the compiled analysis, right? So in essence, control is the act of reducing the difference between the plan and reality and then communicating that with the stakeholders. Recall that the aim of the project is to help achieve some strategic objective in the organization, and that's why communication becomes so important. In fact, if you think back to our conversation in risk management, that was really a special kind of control that we discussed back then. The various tools that we used were all about control in the project. So as we have seen, a great many things can go wrong with a project. The author of the literature focuses on scope, time, and cost. I think that's a little too narrow, but it does certainly deserve special attention. I would agree with that completely. When looking at, we are very concerned about what can go wrong with project scopes, cost, or schedule as a result of the uncertainty in any project, right? The lion's share of uncertainty certainly has its source in these three items, right? And so the project manager is constantly concerned with these three aspects. Now, the book on page 422 lays out these items in scope, cost, and time, which are of particular concern to you, and you'll want to read through that and focus on those. So let's get right back then into control, right? So there are only a few of the relatively mechanistic problems that can occur, right? And all problems, in addition to mechanistic, we want to look at this human element to problems in projects, right? And so, with humans, we're concerned with the chain of events that were set in motion, the failure to budget adequately, the quality problems that are created by a lack of attention to detail, right? All of these can lead technically to a very difficult path and failures in the project itself. And so there are many things that impact this human aspect in addition to the mechanical aspect. Murphy's Law, right, comes to mind. And most of us already know what that is. Parkinson's Law, right, where we complete a task early, but then just kind of sit on it, not really developing it, right? We lose control. And student syndrome, when we wait till the end, but we know we have a due date to the project manager, so we rush through it to make sure it gets done on time, right? So there is a clear distinction between the project mechanistic and human aspects. And so at one level you have leadership, which is mechanistic and causation. And at another level you have management and human nature and chance that develops as a result of that. And somewhere in there is some mix between fact and feeling, right? As we define the problem. And so what we're looking to do is to approach control in a very orderly way, right? And the literature gives several ways that we're going to do that. This is really the fundamental purpose of control, is to make sure that the results are through an alteration of activities when needed, and that we are good stewards of the resources that we are using. Okay, it's about this conservation. Now, one of the aspects that we will want to consider in the fundamental purpose of control is physical asset control. This is a common error in IT in my experience. For example, asset management, we call it, right? It's one of the least utilized and probably least understood aspects. The onboarding, the offboarding, the supply chain issues that can develop as a result of a lack of asset management, right? But done right, it can significantly increase my control in IT of who's on my network and what they're doing on my network, which is really one of the key aspects of security. Who's on my network and what are they doing? I can't really have that until I have asset control. That's a physical asset control. It's just a good example of how we might apply control in IT. Human resource control is another aspect, right? We want to grow and develop our people. We mentor, motivate, coach, guide, lead, and discipline, right? We even do conflict resolution in terms of human resource control, right? A tool that you will use and that you could research is called the Staffing Management Plan. It will tell you, through the Staffing Management Plan, you will document the level of skill that you need on your project, right? You don't want all top principal technologists or all top project managers. You want a mix of them that are needed to get the job done, because you will pay much more for others. But realize, as I have a PM level 4, a 3, a 2, and a 1, that I'm going to have some human resource control issues that go along with that. So be aware of that. There's also, there's physical control, human resource control, and financial control are some of the really key items, right? That clients will insist on, of course, and the courts will require us as project managers to apply due diligence in the exercise of our financial responsibilities. Due diligence requires the organization proposing a project to conduct a reasonable investigation and verification and disclosure of financial items. So that's certainly something to be aware of. Now, getting into the meat of the readings this week, there are 3 types of control processes: cybernetic, go, no-go, and post-control. And we are not simply waiting, right, for something to go wrong, and then, if it does, we're going to fix it. No, we must decide at what points in the project we'll try to exert control. What is to be controlled? How is it to be measured? How much deviation are we willing to allow? I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes, called normal variation. And then we're even going to talk about when we do it, like phase gates, okay? So no matter what the purpose of controlling your project, there are these 3 basic types of control mechanisms. As I mentioned, cybernetic, go, no-go, and post-control. Now, starting with cybernetic. Cybernetic control is really like a steering control. It's a key feature of it is automation. It's automatic operation, right? Making the system work for us. And this picture here demonstrates that. We have our inputs that we're monitoring, and we're going to put them into the process. And at the end of the process, as we're moving towards our output, the deliverable we're seeking to get, we're going to have a sensor there. And this function is performed by sensors on one or more aspects of the output. It doesn't have to be all of them. And Presumably, right? It's on those aspects that we wish to control. And so the measurements taken by the sensor are transmitted to some tool that will compare this set of predetermined standards versus the actual results. Again, looking for that gap. The difference between the actual and the standard is then sent to some decision maker, right? Which will determine if correction is actually required. So in this process of correction, there's this human aspect, right, which is still important. You could use machine learning, you could use artificial intelligence, for example. And so cybernetic control systems, they act to reduce deviations from the standard. And this is called a negative feedback loop that we want to consider in the work we're doing. There are, of course, information requirements for cybernetic controllers. So we need a strategy to aid the project manager in developing this control system. So one such strategy to use is a cost-benefit approach to control, which we've talked about back in the cost lesson. We could also use an examination of the work breakdown structure, which is going to tell us, and I touch on that in a few minutes, it's going to tell us or reveal which of the project tasks are largely mechanistic, one of the things you might want to look at. Perhaps the most difficult task in creating a cybernetic control is setting the actual standards that we're going to be dealing with. And these standards are a common subject for negotiation between you and the various stakeholders, right? So in order to implement all of this, we're going to use the critical ratio or earned value analysis, a couple of tools we can use to act as our cybernetic controls. And both can be used in that way. Cost performance index, schedule performance index are just two examples, and we discussed those both back in the cost lesson a few weeks ago. Now, there are go, no-go controls. This is really a great quality management tool. So go, no-go controls take the form of testing to see if some specific precondition has been met, right? In quality management, we might call it attribute sampling, right? Which is a simple yes, no. If you recall, even in quality management, we talked about degree versus grade, right? And we said the quality degree is just a simple yes, no answer. Does the item meet the quality requirements that we had intended? Yes or no. We used a car as an example. Eggs are sometimes an example I use. Doesn't matter if they're AAA rated, single A rated eggs. Is it an egg? Is it an edible, healthy egg? That's really my bottom line requirement for at-home cooking. So when we're considering these go, no-go controls, the project plan, the budget, and the schedule are all control documents. So we as the project managers have to design this system to satisfy the controls that we're looking for, the standards, and the milestones around them. The controls really should be linked to the actual plans that we're working on and to the occurrence of real events, not simply milestone events. That's one of the problems with a milestone is it's tied to really a calendar event, right? And we want to move beyond that in terms of real control. So we want to identify the baselines. We talked about that, the scope baseline, cost baseline, and schedule baseline. That forms our iron triangle that we've discussed earlier. And we want to monitor those continually. We want to, in addition to those, we want to stay abreast of all aspects of the project. And we want to follow up. We want to develop triggers, early warning systems. So in terms of a go, no-go decision, you have these phases in the life cycle. I just picked 3 phases. You might have only 1 phase in your project of your life cycle. You might have 10, right? Based on your approach. And at the end of each, at the top left where it says project close or phase close in that case, you're going to do a gate, a go, no-go decision, a kill point, a determination. Okay, I'm going to come back with some other key terms in just a moment. for part 2.